Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here. Now that my two informative videos are done for the day, it's time to talk about current events in the online fitness community. And this one is going to be very informative also, even though it's a current event video. So let me put on my +5 out of weaponsmithing, work on skilling up my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about the whole situation with the rack pulls and Eric Bugenhagen. Now, I did my video on rack pulls the other day, and he came in and commented, and he got into quite a bit of a discussion in the videos, and I kept screenshots because there were some interesting tidbits in there. He kind of gave his take, and I guess he ultimately felt the need to go and make a video about it. And that's interesting because hopefully this kind of puts all this in perspective, because who is it on YouTube that's made rack pulls somewhat famous again? Short range of motion rack pulls? Eric was. He did it. And through AlphaDestiny and Strap-On, because I want to stick mostly with the rack pull, but what's going to be interesting is that the way Strap-On has tried to promote it is not really the way that Eric is doing it. And I made that video about rack pulls the other day, and he came and said, I 100% agree with your video. Now we actually have some agreement here. And I think that's the important thing that people need to understand. When you have people who've been around training and weightlifting and coaching and everything for a really, really long time, you're going to find, even when they tend to disagree on things, you're going to find they agree on more than they disagree on. All right, us old dudes who've been around this iron game a long time, we're going to agree on 90% of points. And that's something to keep in mind there. The stuff that everyone calls, basic cookie cutter, whatever, we're all in agreement because we know what works and what doesn't at a certain point. And what's interesting is that he got it popularized because he felt, having done different forms of rack pulls in the past, which I've talked about below the knee, it is an accessory movement for the conventional deadlift. There are certain people that when you need a little less axial loading for recovery because of potential lower back issues, the same reason a lot of guys prefer the behind the back deadlift, like he said he was doing for him and his D1 wrestlers when he was coaching D1 wrestlers and when he competed as one. That does make sense for certain types of athletes. Finding variations of the deadlift that you can do that reduce axial loading for certain types of athletes but still lift a really heavy weight has merit. Problem is, it doesn't always build your lower back as much, as what the deadlift is amazing at. But I said the same thing years ago. You guys remember when people would ask, hey, what's Chris Kyle doing in the American Sniper video? Why is he doing those trap bar deadlifts? And I said, well, quite simply because he's someone who basically a special forces guy is an athlete, right? And because he needs to spend a lot of time potentially in a prone position, he doesn't want his lower back as fatigued. So he's using a variation that's going to fatigue the lower back less. You know what? I could see that potentially working for wrestlers, particularly very competitive wrestlers, for the same reason. I mean, it doesn't have to be a behind the back. I could see a trap bar deadlift doing essentially the same thing they're trying to do. Not the high handle version where you're doing a partial, but the normal low handle versions is going to give a similar training effect. He had said that he found that his guys, it carried over to their sport better. Well, I don't think any of us are really qualified to argue against that, are we? Ultimately, former D1 wrestler who's coached D1 wrestlers successfully says that this variation of the exercise seems to carry over better to his athletes. Well, then it probably does. I mean, where do you want to argue about it? But, I digress. That aside, he talked further and said, that he thought because he had done rack pulls below the knee and he started doing it really well, I can really overload at the top. He said he really thought it was going to be the key to getting really big and strong and doing all these things, and it turned out it didn't work for that as well as he had hoped. Now, I have no issue with very experienced lifters experimenting, but I mean, if we looked at biomechanics, it should be obvious why that's not going to carry over. I've covered that in the past as to why it's not going to carry over the way people think it does, just because you're moving a lot of weight. And I can see how people will get drawn into that. Even a very, very experienced lifter like him would say, okay, look, I'm lifting a lot of weight at the top. There has to be some sort of systematic response. There has to be something. It's all this poundage is being put on me. Until you realize it's the skeletal structure taking it all. And leverages. It's not lifting it the same way you would with a longer range of motion with different moment arms involved. Because you're lifting at a very efficient angle. It's the skeleton that takes all of the load. It's not really as much as you would think. And what he had found is that, yeah, it did seem to help with traps and other stuff, but it's not even the best thing out there for traps. He, agrees, like what I said, shrugs. I've never seen anyone who was struggling with trap development who didn't go do a bunch of really heavy shrugs for a few years without seeing an enormous improvement. I mean, let's be realistic here. If your traps are weak link, heavy shrugs, or even lighter shrugs with really high volume, will resolve that problem. I don't think it's that big of a deal. Me personally, I don't think overdeveloped traps in comparison to the rest of your body is even a wise choice to make if you're trying to look better. I'm not into the aesthetics thing. I don't care about it. But common sense of looking at classic aesthetics would tell you that's a really bad idea if you're trying to look better. You want traps that are disproportionately large. It doesn't make sense. And he kind of covered that also. But back to the other point with the rack pulls, he ultimately found it beats up equipment and it puts your body at risk because essentially you are loading an enormous amount of weight on your structure. All right, you're loading a weight up on your structure. It's not your muscles that are taking the brunt of that. It's your knees. It's the discs in your back, or even in the case of your shoulders, because you're hanging large amounts of weight off of each arm. That your risk of injury is high. Your risk of injury is high. I'm not saying it's, you're guaranteed to hurt yourself, but every time you do it, it carries with it a degree of risk of injury. Knee injuries, shoulder injuries, back injuries. And people say, well, that's true of any lifting. That's true, but this is much higher risk than others just because of the proportionate amount of weight that you are forced to utilize to train hard through such a short range of motion. It's a high risk to your body with a minimal payoff. Minimal payoff in terms of recoverable volume, because you don't recover from it easily. Minimal payoff in terms of strength and hypertrophy gains. Because it comes back to specificity of training. That joint angle specificity is not going to carry over. All right, if you get really good at pulling a rack pull through 4 inches of range of motion, you get really strong, and you will get strong at it fairly quickly once you adapt to doing it. It's not going to carry over to 6 inches or 7 inches deeper than where you're doing the exercise. You're not going to get stronger through the mid-range. You're not going to get stronger at the bottom. It's not going to carry over to other activities. And it's not really even the best thing for your traps. There are better things for your traps. But also it destroys equipment. It destroys equipment. And again, I'm paraphrasing what Eric said there. And he said he would never, ever, ever rack pull with someone else's equipment. And that's kind of a point I've made to both Strap-On and people who follow him and people who are promoting this. You're destroying other people's property. That makes you an asshole. All right, it's not cool. It's not alpha to destroy other people's property, particularly when you have a business arrangement with them. When you're agreeing that they're allowing you to use a facility and you're abusing their facility in a different manner in which your business agreement with them is, intentionally destroying their equipment for something that's high risk with minimal gain, it just makes you an asshole. And again, kind of the point he made, and he's had to buy specialized bars to do this, which can be found. And you know what? If you have a home gym and you want to train however you want, that's your business. But don't destroy equipment in people's, in public gyms that other people have to use, that other people own, that other people are going to use behind you. It's just bad manners, it's bad ethics, and it makes you a jackass. Which is ultimately what I think of Strap-On. And I've made that clear. And it's not just the rack pulls, it's this excessive use of showing off with the reverse band, chain, slingshot bench presses, and silly crap like that. It's not like he's even training for equipped powerlifting or something, and even if he was, he's being excessive with the amount of accommodating resistance he's using. It's excessive to the point of absurdity. But the rack pulls present a risk, and here's the ultimate thing that it comes down to. He kind of made a point. It's something I've told people in the past also. Why do you want greatly exaggerated traps? And as he said, both in my comments below and in his video, why would you do that? If you're doing it, it's very obvious that you're doing it to improve the way that you look. You're doing it to look better, right? So what are you going to do if you find the magic secret to make this one muscle in your body grow? And that's not even it. Heavy shrugs work better. But you find this magic secret to make this one muscle grow in your body. Now you look disproportionate. You don't look aesthetic. You don't look better. And here's a perfect example. I mean, I'll flip in for you guys here a recent photo of me. This is the one without the filters. I put up the one with filters, or Brittany did, on my Instagram. That's the original photo of me, all pale. I have decent sized traps, but they're proportionate to the rest of my shoulder girdle. And keep in mind, guys, I'm not a bodybuilder. I'm not interested in bodybuilding. I'm not interested in aesthetics. I'm just trying to be fit and strong as I get to be an older man. I just want to be healthy and strong and fit and athletic. That's what I care about. I don't care about any of that. But that's an example there. I keep a relatively proportionate shoulder girdle, and it's because I do a lot of overhead pressing. I do a lot of band. I'm big on face pulls with bands. I'm big on band pull aparts with bands, stuff like that to build up the rear delt. I do a lot of overhead pressing. It's one of my most important exercises. In fact, I spend a whole hour every week right now doing strict presses. I come in and I do like 10 sets. I spend a whole workout doing it. Just trying to get better at it and master it and improve that. And I do deadlifting, right? Deadlifting, band work, overhead pressing. It's actually working pretty well right now to just kind of balance my shoulder girdle out. And it just happens to be balancing my shoulder girdle out because when you train for proportionate strength and balance musculature to prevent injuries, what happens? It kind of balances certain things out to some extent. And the shoulder girdle is definitely one of those where that works very well. But what he pointed out, even in my video comments, was what? Well, the person should really work on getting a fully balanced shoulder girdle. So even if they shouldn't be worried about just focusing on their traps, they need to be doing overhead pressing. What else did he say? Like, I think he said band face pulls, high pulls, things like that. A lot of focus on those things, making sure that they're working the entirety of their shoulder girdle. Now, some people are going to be like, high pulls. You know what? I'm going to say, people argue on shoulder development. A lot of really good coaches out there will argue whether high pulls or doing an actual power clean is better for shoulder development. Like Jamie Lewis will tell you, in his experience, he prefers the high pull. Mark Ripito will tell you that the power clean, because you get a higher pull, you're guaranteed to get a higher pull if you go ahead and rack it. That's a major point of contention in strength and conditioning circles. But Eric said that, and people say, well, your opinion is not relevant. Eric is entitled to an opinion on that. Why? Because the guy's big, he's strong, he has competitive experience himself, and he has coaching experience as well. All right, the guy's got, 18 years of training experience. He's got firsthand and coaching experience, and he's got 18 years of it. At that point, that makes him qualified to have an opinion on whether the high pull versus a actual power clean to where you rack it is better for shoulder development. See, he's earned a right to an opinion on that. Whereas in other people listening, they really haven't earned a right. They can have an opinion, but they haven't really earned a right to it. Their opinion's irrelevant. It really is irrelevant. And people need to remember that when they develop opinions on these things. That's fine that you have an opinion, but it doesn't mean that you're entitled to it. Doesn't mean you're qualified to have an opinion. I might have opinions on certain things in medical research and cancer research, but it doesn't mean I'm entitled to that opinion. And therein lies the difference. But his point overall, a combination of big compound movements to develop your whole shoulder structure would be a better idea than coming in and saying, I'm going to just blow my traps up really, really big. Because if you do, you're not going to get the desired result anyways. You guys who are chasing aesthetics, for those of you who are choosing to do that, you probably need to maximally develop your whole body. And you're going to do that by getting strong at a decent variety of big, heavy compound movements. Now, when I say a decent variety, that doesn't mean that you need to do 37 different exercises, because this is where, again, Eric and I agree. Minimalist training works. Focus on a handful of very effective exercises that build a lot of muscle in multiple muscle groups. Focus on them, master them, get really, really good at them. And it might be as few as 3 or 4, but I would say, up to about 6 or 7. Most of you guys out there probably pick 6 or 7 really good exercises and spend the next couple of years get really, really good at 6 or 7 basic, well-balanced exercises. And you're probably going to be pretty big overall. What do I mean by that? Perfect example: squat, bench, deadlift, overhead press of some type, maybe some chin-ups, some power cleans, or some power snatches if you don't like power cleans, whatever. Pick 6 really balanced, big, heavy compound movements and master them. Get good at them. Most of those weak points are going to come up as far as your genetics will allow for it. And that's what people need to remember. Not everyone was born equal. Not all of you out there are born to be Arnold Schwarzenegger. Not all of you out there are born to be Ed Cohen. You know, different people have different genetic gifts. And that's what you've got to accept. And also, again, you guys are going to have to accept you're not going to be able to blow up lean the way that you think you are either. Those guys who are trying to get aesthetic and make all these things grow, you're going to have to actually bulk at some point. You can always trim the fat off later, but if you're not willing to gain some weight, you're not going to gain the size that you want to be aesthetic in the long term anyways. Remember, all of this stuff comes in steps. You know what? You've got to take the different things that you have in bite-sized chunks. You have to have different goals, and you have to do things in different phases to get where you want to get. That's just the reality of it. And I know that's getting sidetracked, but the main thing I wanted to cover is that look. We can put in the nail in the coffin on this whole above the knee rack pull thing, because again, I've told you guys a lot about it. Now you have Eric Bugenhagen, who has pretty much brought this over to the YouTube world, who is saying, look, here's my take on it. Since this is being thrown at me, and this is being labeled as my exercise, I want my stance on it to be clear. And he got to make that stance. And so you guys go check it out. I'll link his video down below also. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.